September 1958. Harlem didn't feel dangerous that night. It felt alive. Jazz drifted through open windows, laughter spilled onto sidewalks, and the glow of streetlights reflected off polished shoes and sharp suits. Inside a crowded room, men talked business, musicians tuned their instruments, and drinks were poured without a second thought. At the center of it all sat Bumpy Johnson, calm, composed, untouchable. And standing just a few feet behind him was the man everyone trusted most, the man who was supposed to protect him, the man who had already taken the deal. Nobody in that room knew it yet. Not the mobsters watching from a distance, not the people dancing to the music, not even Bumpy himself, but loyalty had already been sold, and when the moment finally came, it wouldn't be the bullet that changed everything. It would be the silence. If you think this story is just about betrayal, you're missing the real point. This is about power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't rush, and doesn't make mistakes. And by the time this night was over, Harlem would learn exactly how dangerous patience can be. Before we go deeper, take a second and hit the like button. Stories like this survive because people who appreciate real power make sure they're seen. The man standing behind Bumpy Johnson that night wasn't just security. He wasn't some hired muscle brought in from outside. He was family, at least in the way Harlem defined it. For 5 years, he walked wherever Bumpy walked. He stood between Bumpy and bullets. He knew the routes, the exits, the places Bumpy liked to sit, the moments when his attention drifted just enough to be vulnerable. Trust like that wasn't given lightly in Harlem. It was earned slowly through years of loyalty, silence, and bloodshed. That trust is exactly why the Italian mob didn't send a hitman. They didn't send 12 men. They didn't send a stranger with something to prove. They sent an offer. It happened quietly, the way the most dangerous things always do. No shouting, no threats, just a car parked on a side street and a man in a clean suit who didn't look like trouble. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He just talked. He spoke about futures, about security, about how fast things could change in this life. Then he opened the briefcase, not dramatically, not for show, just enough for the money to be seen. The message was simple. They didn't need hatred. They didn't need passion. They didn't even need commitment. They needed one moment, one step aside, one night where the closest man didn't do what he had always done. And the money? The money was enough to make a man imagine a life where fear wasn't constant. Here's something most people never understand about betrayal. It rarely starts with greed. It starts with pressure, bills that don't stop coming, family members who need help, a future that feels smaller every day. The mob understood that better than anyone. They didn't insult him. They didn't threaten him. They let the money sit there and allowed the weight of it to settle in his mind. The closest man didn't say yes right away. He hesitated. And hesitation is where loyalty begins to crack. 3 days later, he made the call. The deal was done. Quick question. Do you think loyalty has a price, or does it only break when the pressure becomes unbearable? Drop your answer in the comments. This story gets even heavier when you think about that. What the mob didn't realize was that while they believed they were making the smartest move of their lives, Bumpy Johnson had already survived long enough to know one simple truth: betrayal leaves traces. People change. Movements change. Silence changes. And Bumpy didn't rule Harlem by trusting blindly. He ruled it by watching everything. Bumpy had eyes everywhere. Not spies in trench coats, just regular people who noticed things others ignored. Bartenders who heard conversations that went on too long. Drivers who saw the same faces too often. Men who understood that information was the most valuable currency in the city. When something felt off, it didn't stay a secret for long. That's how the name reached him. The closest man. It didn't come with proof. No recordings. No confession. Just a pattern that didn't fit. And for Bumpy Johnson, that was enough to pause. enough to wait, enough to think. Most men in his position would have reacted immediately. One phone call, and the problem disappears. That was the Harlem way. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. He understood something deeper. Killing a traitor doesn't stop betrayal. It just delays the next one. The mob would try again. Another offer, another weak point, another mistake. So Bumpy chose a different path. He didn't confront him, didn't accuse him, didn't even change the way he looked at him. If anything, he treated him exactly the same. That was the most terrifying part, because while the closest man believed the plan was moving forward, Bumpy was already planning something else. Power doesn't always strike fast. Sometimes it waits until the truth has nowhere left to hide. Days passed, then weeks. The closest man grew more confident. Every time he stood behind Bumpy and nothing happened, his fear eased. The mob checked in quietly. Everything was on track. The moment would come soon. All he had to do was play his role one last time. And Bumpy watched. He noticed the tension in the man's shoulders, the way his eyes moved, the way he touched his jacket a little more often than usual. He didn't need confirmation anymore. He needed timing. That timing came with a meeting, a public one. The kind of night where everyone important would be in the same room. Music, drinks, conversation. A perfect setting, not for a clean kill, but for a message. Behind the scenes, Bumpy made one adjustment, just one. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve threats or violence. It involved patience and precision. The kind of move that only works if you truly understand people. It involved the gun. If this story had you leaning forward right now, stay with me. What happens next only works because of everything that came before it. The night arrived quietly. The closest man dressed the same way he always did. Same jacket, same posture, same position behind Bumpy Johnson. Nothing felt different, and that's exactly what made it dangerous. The room filled. Conversations overlapped. Jazz hummed through the air. No one noticed the tension building inside one man's chest. His hand rested where the gun should be, and he smiled, because as far as he knew, the hardest part was already over. The deal had been made. The money was real. The future was waiting. All that remained was a single moment, a moment he believed he controlled. He stepped closer to Bumpy Johnson, just like he had 100 times before. The next move would expose everything. He stepped closer, not rushed, not nervous, just close enough. Years of routine took over. The closest man didn't think anymore. His body moved on instinct. The same instinct that had protected Bumpy Johnson through gunfights, ambushes, and late-night meetings. The same instinct the mob believed they had finally turned against him. His fingers wrapped around the grip inside his jacket. The weight felt familiar, reassuring, solid. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. He drew the gun smoothly, a movement so natural no one reacted. He aimed, pulled the trigger. Click. The sound wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't echo like a gunshot. But somehow it swallowed every other noise in the room. The music died mid-note. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Conversations collapsed into silence. The closest man blinked. For half a second his mind refused to accept what his hands had just felt. Guns don't click like that. Not real ones. Not when everything is supposed to end. He pulled the trigger again. Click. That's when fear arrived. Not panic. Panic comes later. This was something colder, something heavier. The understanding that something fundamental had gone wrong and that the mistake wasn't mechanical. It was personal. Every eye in the room was on him now. And then Bumpy Johnson moved. He didn't jump. He didn't flinch. He didn't reach for cover. He took a slow sip from his glass, set it down carefully, and turned around in his chair. The room stayed frozen. Bumpy looked up at the man who had stood behind him for 5 years. The man who knew his routines, his habits, his blind spots. The man who had taken the deal. There was no anger in Bumpy's face, no shock, just disappointment. "I was counting on you," Bumpy said quietly. 5 words, that was all. But they landed harder than any bullet ever could. If that line hit you the way it hit that room, type power in the comments. Because this is the moment everything changed. The closest man felt his legs weaken, his grip loosened. The gun slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull sound that finally broke the silence. He knew then. He knew before Bumpy said another word. Bumpy had known. About the meeting. About the money. About the deal. Weeks ago, the gun hadn't failed. It had been replaced. This wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Bumpy Johnson stood up slowly. He wasn't tall, but in that moment he seemed larger than everyone else in the room combined. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult the man. He didn't need to. "You thought this was about killing me," Bumpy said calmly. "It was never about that." The closest man dropped to his knees. Not because he was forced to, because his body couldn't hold him anymore. Years of loyalty, fear, justification, and regret collapsed all at once. Bumpy leaned slightly forward. "You took their money," he continued. "But you forgot something." The man looked up, tears cutting through the shame on his face. "In Harlem," Bumpy said, "we don't test power with bullets. We test it with patience." The room stayed silent. No one moved. No one spoke, because everyone understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't an execution. This was worse. This was exposure. Public, undeniable, unforgettable. Bumpy gestured toward the door. "You're leaving tonight," he said. "You'll take whatever you can carry. You'll disappear, and you will never come back." The man nodded frantically. He didn't beg. He didn't argue. He knew better. Harlem wasn't forgiving, and this was mercy. "And when they ask you what happened," Bumpy added, his voice dropping just enough to make the words heavier, "you'll tell them the truth." The closest man picked up the useless gun, his hands shaking. He backed away slowly, then turned and walked out of the room. No one stopped him. No one followed him. Because the lesson wasn't for him anymore. It was for everyone else. Before the door even closed, the message was already spreading. By the time the sun came up, every crew from Harlem to Brooklyn knew what had happened. Not because someone bragged, not because rumors grew wild, because the story was too clean to distort. The mob had tried to buy loyalty. Bumpy Johnson had let them. And then he had shown everyone what loyalty was worth. If you're still watching right now, you already understand something most people never will. Hit subscribe, because stories like this don't get told often, and they don't get told this way. The Italian mob called an emergency meeting the next morning. Angry voices filled the room. Fingers were pointed. Plans were questioned. But beneath the frustration was something far more dangerous. Respect. They hadn't just failed. They had been outplayed. They tried force before. It didn't work. They tried numbers. It didn't work. They tried money. It didn't work. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't fight their strength. He used their confidence against them. From that day forward, offers stopped coming. Not just to Bumpy's people, to anyone connected to Harlem. The risk was too high. The lesson too clear. Bumpy Johnson didn't need violence to control his territory. He needed memory. Years later, people would still talk about that night. Not about a gunshot, not about a body on the floor, but about the click, the pause, the way a single moment revealed everything that had been hidden. The closest man was never seen in Harlem again. Some said he went south. Others said he worked construction under a different name. It didn't matter. His story was finished the moment the truth came out. Bumpy Johnson went back to his seat. The music started again. Drinks were poured. Conversations resumed. To anyone walking in late, it looked like nothing had happened. But everything had. That's the kind of power most people never recognize. The kind that doesn't announce itself with noise or blood. The kind that waits, watches, and lets others destroy themselves. True power isn't pulling the trigger. It's deciding when it never needs to be pulled at all. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who understands what real power looks like, and stay tuned, because the next story proves that betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from the man standing closest to you.